Chapter 9. I came onto the bridge the next morning about 15 minutes before we were scheduled to pop back into the universe. On TV shows, the captain tells her crew to drop out of warp or exit hyperspace, and there you go. In real life, there seemed to be a lot of planning and plotting and computing to be done as they readied to enter the Grari system. Everyone had things to do. The various aliens were calling out numbers and coordinates, punching in information, and double-checking readings. The captain spared a moment to greet me, however.
"Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. I see from the logs that you've been doing some weapons training."
Yes, ma'am," I said, feeling more than a little pleased she'd bothered to find out what I'd been up to.
"In a few years, you could be serving on a ship like this one,"
she said. "I don't think I'm quite ready for that," I told her, "but I think it'd be a lot of fun." The captain was about to say something else, but a message came across her screen, and she forgot me as she tended to business.
"All systems synced," she said. "Take us out of tunnel, ye stip."
The recorded message came on, telling us to prepare to re-enter normal space. A few seconds later, there was a shudder, a moment of sickening dizziness, and a flash of light inside my mind as I lost all bearings and nothing felt right. Then the discomfort was gone, and we were moving through normal space again. The view screens switched from showing a logistical illustration of our position to a visual map. There, before us, was an alien sun, glowing as bright as my own. The Grari system had an outer gas giant, just like Earth's system, and we zipped past them until we came into orbit around a planet that was, at first glance, very similar to my own. It was blue with white clouds and polar caps. Only the unfamiliar shapes of the land masses below revealed that it wasn't my own world. I supposed this planet, like Earth, had been visited and changed and seeded by the formers. Clearly, they had a design that they liked. I'd seen so much already. I'd met a dozen or more alien species. I'd been on board a spaceship and hung out with the captain and her crew. And now, here was an actual planet. A world with its own creatures and history and societies. Not just a single being or a collection of beings, but a world whose sights and sounds and smells were as varied and infinite as those on Earth, but entirely and unimaginably different. Down there would be languages and history and traditions and ways of life no one on Earth had ever considered. They would have myths and stories all their own. The word awesome gets overused a lot. I myself have on occasion been a serious abuser, but this was awesome in the truest sense. I was filled with awe, and the crazy thing was that this planet, the sphere teeming with unique and unknowable life, was just a drop in the bucket compared to 100 other worlds in the Confederation, and then the thousands of worlds outside the Confederation. I hated being a random and being ostracized by the other humans, but even if I was having the worst initiation experience possible, I knew I was really lucky to be a part of all of this. I watched as Wimlow informed the captain that the shuttle had launched, and then on the far side of the planet, I watched it appear, at first a distant speck, slowly growing closer. On board that ship would be 4 Grari, one of whom was a random. Maybe I could be friends with him or her. Maybe I might have more in common with another random than I did with my own species.
"Captain,"
Urch called out, snapping me from my thoughts.
"I'm picking up radiation consistent with a tunnel aperture forming 5,000 kilometers dead ahead. It's coming in between us and the shuttle."
The captain rose from her chair and jabbed her trunk at Urch.
"Can you identify it?"
"Too soon to be certain, ma'am, but the distortion is constant with a phatic signature."
"Activate shielding,"
the captain said, her voice icy calm. She looked at my gaming buddy at the helm.
"Ye stip, get us between the aperture and the shuttle, best speed."
I wanted to ask her what was going on, but I knew better. I kept my mouth shut because it was the right thing to do and because the tension on the bridge was unmistakable and terrifying. This was an emergency, and at best, I was going to be in the way. At worst, I'd be ordered off the bridge. Whatever a phatic was, it was bad news. I wanted to go back to my cabin and hide, but even more, I wanted to understand what was going on. Captain Quassel spun on her navigational officer.
"Zekel, plot a course to send the shuttle back to the surface. Wimlow, as soon as he's done, override the shuttle's navigation system with the new course. Inform the Grari that..."
She didn't get a chance to finish speaking because there was a flash of light on the primary view screen as an invisible scalpel sliced a jagged line into space. Light and clouds of what looked like mist oozed from the wound in the universe. Then the slash vanished, and a ship was suddenly there, blocking our view of the shuttle. I felt my blood turn cold, as if every cell in my body knew that whatever had just shown up was bad news. The ship was as black as space itself, almost invisible but for a series of flashing lights that illuminated its form. Narrow from top to bottom, but broad across with a slight protrusion towards the top and its middle. It hovered in the void, its lights like the eyes of a wakened predator. The alien ship was a flying saucer, but the most diabolical flying saucer imaginable.
"Get me eyes on the shuttle," the captain said. "Yistip, replot a course. Get us around the ship. Urch, prepare weapons lock, but do not fire until I give the order. Wimlow, contact the Faddic ship. Tell its captain that the planet has been placed under Confederation protection, and whatever they're thinking about doing, it's likely stupid."
The communications officer clacked its mandibles and typed out a message, and then read the response, which popped up a second later. It was like galactic texting.
"Ma'am, they say this is neutral territory, that the Grari have not signed any treaties with the Confederation."
"I was hoping that they hadn't realized that,"
the captain said, lowering herself back into her chair.
"Contact them again, see if they'd like to talk to us. This cannot escalate."
More mandible clacking. Perhaps a nervous gesture.
"They're declining to talk, ma'am."
We had now looped around the Faddic ship and were moving towards the shuttle.
"Yistip, if the Fads are looking for trouble, will the shuttle be safe?"
She answered without turning her beaked face from the captain.
"No, ma'am, it has minimal shielding. If the Fads want it, they've got it."
"Can we lance it and bring it aboard before they can fire?"
"Distances are too great," Urch said. "We can lance, but we can't bring it in quickly enough, not if they mean to destroy it."
"Right."
She considered the matter for a few seconds, twirling her trunk in a tight little circle. Then she turned to Yistip.
"Plot a new course for the shuttle. Move it towards the surface for another 30 seconds, then reverse and bring it to the shuttle bay fast. The most erratic flight pattern you can safely implement. They're in for a rough ride, so have a medical team in the bay to meet them."
"Yes, ma'am." Yistip began furiously entering data onto the navigation console. Then there was a flash of light. Before the shuttle could even alter course, the Faddic ship fired. It wasn't like in the movies where you can watch the beam travel from one ship to another. In reality, the beam moved at the speed of light. There was a flash and then another. Where once there had been a transport, there now was a ball of fire, as the venting oxygen burned. Then the vacuum snuffed out the flame, and there was only a sprinkling of debris that spiraled out of the center of the plume of metal and plastic. The 4 Grari applicants were dead. In a single instant, they'd been brutally murdered. I stared, hardly believing it. I felt terror and sadness and rage, and 100 other things I couldn't name. This place was supposed to be safe. They told us the Confederation was peaceful. Clearly, they hadn't told us everything. The captain was standing again, looking grim. For a moment, she waggled her trunk wildly, and her eyes became huge. Then she stopped moving, and her expression seemed to darken.
"Mr. Urch, how do we stand against that ship?"
"It's a
Stonefist
class cruiser, ma'am. Our PPBs won't do much to it, but our shields will hold off its weapons more or less indefinitely."
"Tunnel a comm beacon to Confederation Central," she ordered. "Call for reinforcements. Let's see if we can keep them busy until help shows up."
There was another burst of light, and then a massive rumble as we were hit by enemy fire. Lights now flashed all over the bridge. Alarms were going off. Not mind-numbing klaxons, but quieter beeps and dings and buzzes as consoles begged their operators for attention.
"Status,"
the captain demanded.
"Damage to the lower decks,"
Mr. Urch said. He typed away furiously and then looked up, alarmed.
"They found a way to boost their PPB effectiveness against our defenses. Shield strength is functioning only at 47%.
"So we're not going to hold out indefinitely."
I don't think we're going to hold out a quarter hour against what they have.
Ye step plot a tunnel. Let me know the instant we have aperture. Recommendations, Mr. Urch.
Urch was busy tapping data onto his console and didn't turn to face her when he spoke.
If we flee, our weapons capacity will be further diminished. To remain a threat, we should stand our ground, or advance until the moment the aperture forms.
I found myself nodding. This was something I'd learned in the previous night in the sim room. When a ship is fleeing, the ion wake of the engine disperses its PPB charges. In other words, once you run, you can't return fire with any real force. If we backed off, we'd have no ability to fight until the tunnel opened, and we wouldn't really have anywhere to run. My thoughts were interrupted by 3 more flashes, and the ship rumbled again. More distressed consoles cried out as they scrolled data and warnings and bad news.
Direct hit to our rear starboard engine,
Urch said. There were more flashes, more rumbles, more alarms. Things were happening quickly. We were being overwhelmed. Every member of the crew was busy at his or her terminal, entering commands rapidly, trying to keep ahead of the attack. Each time they appeared calm, but I felt like I could read panic on their alien faces.
Forward port engine is offline,
Urch announced.
We've lost tunnel capacity,
Zekel the Earthworm, the tunneling expert, said.
And I don't think we can get 5% lights until we effect repairs.
The captain pointed at the screen with her trunk.
Begin repairs at once, and let's use what we've got. Urch, move all shielding to forward sections. Siphon power from anything non-essential if you have to. Plot a course for the FADC ship, Yistip. Best speed.
Yes, ma'am, she said, her voice cool, though she clacked her beak a couple of times. Ramming vector laid in. The captain must have noticed my terrified expression, and she flashed me a sympathetic look.
Mr. Reynolds, energy shields can't simultaneously block physical objects and energy weapons. To avoid being destroyed when we ram them, they'll have to convert their shields, and if they do that, we can fire on them. If they don't convert shields, the impact will destroy them. It's a standoff, and they'll have no choice but to withdraw. We can't beat them in combat, so we're making a combat a losing proposition.
Very nice of her to explain to me. Even so, I saw that there was a safety rail near where I was standing, and I grabbed hold of it. Hanging on wasn't going to save me, but it made me feel marginally less frightened. Wimlow looked over at the captain.
Captain, the FADC ship is sending audio.
Let's hear it.
A calm voice came over the speaker.
Confederation Central. We do not wish to destroy you. Surrender and your crew will not be harmed. Refuse and you are of no use to us.
Commander FADC Vestal, the captain replied. You know we won't do that. This is pointless.
The point is your surrender,
the FADC captain said. The captain jabbed her trunk at Wimlow, indicating an end to communication.
Sublit navigation is now functional, but slow.
We can tunnel in 7 minutes,
Zekel said.
Plot a tunnel and be ready to enter the moment we achieve aperture, the captain said. But I don't think they have 7 minutes of restraint in them. We're alone out here, hopelessly outgunned and without enough time to escape. Mr. Urch, give me your tactical read of the situation.
If we're buying time, Urch said, we should keep our weapons fire to a minimum. If they think we can't fight, they'll move more slowly.
The captain nodded.
I agree. Escalating conflict is not a winning option, she said. Hold fire until I say otherwise, but Wimlow, send another beacon. We won't get reinforcements in time, and I want the registration on that ship noted.
If I understood the captain correctly, she was now talking about what was going to happen after we were destroyed. It looked like the FADC flying saucer of death was determined to make that happen. There were more flashes of light, more rumbles. Urch called out damage reports and hull breaches, but the concentrated shielding seemed to be keeping us alive, if just barely. And for the record, we were still moving to ram the enemy ship. Urch scowled and his hands twitched, but he didn't touch the weapons console. I could see he was itching to fire, but the captain had agreed with his own assessment. Still, if we were going to be destroyed, I knew he'd want to get off a few shots first. I watched on the screen as the enemy grew larger and more menacing. As they fired on us and we shook like a plane going through turbulence, I understood there was a good chance we were going to die. Maybe it was a certainty. We were either going to be destroyed by the enemy or destroyed when we crashed into the enemy. The only chance that we had was that the ship would realize it had nothing to gain and back off. It showed no signs of doing that, though. Then there were a dozen or more flashes in quick succession. The ship rocked. Lights flickered. I heard a distant rumble of explosions. Unlike on TV shows, no consoles exploded, but I watched as several dimmed, and more than half of them extinguished entirely. All around me, officers of the Dependable tapped furiously at screens and keyboards, trying to bring their stations back to life, but the bridge was now cast in a gloomy twilight.
Shielding is fluctuating, Urch said. Damage reports from all decks.
Stabilize defenses, the captain said, her voice steady. Restraint doesn't seem to be working. I didn't want this, but I won't make it easy on them. See what you can do to dissuade them, Mr. Urch. And if you have a clear shot for our dark matter missile, take it.
Urch bared his teeth as he fired off several PPB bursts. The phatic ship returned fire, and then things, which were really bad, got a whole lot worse. As if someone had pulled a switch, gravity was gone. My stomach dropped out, and the concepts of up and down were dismantled, and they were distant, fond memories. This didn't feel like the disorientation of leaving relativistic space. This was something far more physical and unpleasant. I felt like I was falling, plummeting. Not vomiting took all of my concentration. Whatever means the ship used to generate gravity had been damaged or destroyed, and if I hadn't been holding onto the railing already, I would have gone flying the instant the gravity failed. Then, seconds after, I became weightless. We were spinning wildly as the Dependable lost stabilizers and went cascading through space. Anything not tied down was thrown by the powerful force of the ship's mad gyration. The captain, in mid-order, was cast out of her chair. Everyone on the bridge was hurled from their stations. Everyone but me, still clinging to my rail. I heard cries of frustration as the officers tried to right themselves, tried to make it back to their consoles, but between the lack of gravity and the spinning of the ship, it was impossible to find a destination. There were cries of pain. Blood floated in thick globs in the weightlessness. Someone's tooth sailed past me. Then the ship came under control and the gravity returned, but not in that order. The gravity was half a second ahead of the stabilizers, so when the ship suddenly righted, nearly everyone went flying through the air like popcorn in a popper, some hitting the walls, some the floor, some the ceilings, and one another in midair. When everything became still, the bridge officers were cast about like battered toys. I struck the wall hard, and my arm was jerked painfully, but I don't think I was seriously hurt. The captain was trying to get up as she clutched a clearly broken arm. Urch had been hurled halfway across the bridge and now lay terrifyingly still. Yistip seemed to have broken her leg, but she dragged herself back to her console and established our course to collide with the enemy ship. She was, I realized, the only being on the bridge capable of resuming her station. A few others were moving, slowly, but the crew had been almost entirely neutralized. I looked again at Urch, motionless. I looked at the weapons console. I looked at the captain, who was typing onto her data bracelet keyboard using her one good hand.
Trying to get backup crew, but there are injuries all over the ship.
She glanced at me.
Until a replacement arrives, I need you to operate weapons, Mr. Reynolds.
I stood still, staring at her, understanding what she had just told me, but not believing it. I couldn't do what she asked. There was no way. I wasn't a trained weapons officer. I noodled around in a sim for a couple of hours, but that was it. She could not seriously want me to do this, I told myself. But I knew it wasn't true. She needed me to step up, for the simple reason that there wasn't anyone else. I swallowed and ran to the console. I tapped on the screen and quickly got an image of the enemy ship, but it was moving fast, engaging in countermeasures that made a lock-on difficult. Identifying the engines or any other specific system was harder, so much harder than it had been in the simulation. This wasn't like what I'd practiced, which had been challenging but possible. This was so much more complicated. Our ship was moving, the enemy was moving. There were flashing lights and indicators demanding my attention. Text scrolled endlessly. We were about to be blown up, and I was powerless to do anything about it. The chair might as well have been empty for all the good my sitting in it did. The phatic captain's voice came over the speakers again.
Confederation ship You are severely damaged and significantly outmatched. Surrender, and your lives will be spared.
I was desperately trying to get a lock on something, anything, but it was impossible to nail down. Every time I thought I had a target in my sights, it slipped away. The ship moved across my screen too quickly. My head hammered, my hands shook. This wasn't possible, I wasn't good enough. Maybe brilliant Charles, or strategic Niana, or agile me-sun could have done it, but I was just a random. I wanted to tell Captain Quassel that she'd made a mistake. She needed to find someone else, but I knew there was no time. I had to make it work. I had to, or we were all going to die. I took a deep breath and tried to make myself believe I wasn't at the weapons station. This was not life or death. I was playing a game. It was the newest, most vivid version of Halo, and here I was in the most intense vehicle sequence ever created. It was just a game, I said. I did okay at games, and sometimes won the tough levels without having to save and start over. When I played, sometimes I liked to pretend that it was real, and that it counted. Now it was real, and I needed to pretend it was just for fun. I almost had their life support system locked down, but then it was gone. I was blowing this, failing miserably. They were going to destroy us without me even firing a single shot. I remembered all the little tricks Urch had taught me to compensate for the movement of two ships. As I honed in on my target, the engines, I failed, and then I failed again, and I failed a third time. But on the fourth try, I got a lock. I fired off a volley of PPP blasts, and my console told me I'd scored a direct hit on the target. There were 3 satisfying flashes against the saucer's hull. I pumped my fist in satisfaction and checked the readout. I had done only superficial damage. In my limited combat experience, I'd figured out a few things about this enemy. They had better weapons, but we were supposed to have better shields. There was apparently a rock-paper-scissors balance of power between the Confederation and the Fadics, or Fads, or whatever they were. This time, they'd come out with a stronger rock, and that's why we were taking this beating. They'd improved their weapons, and we were defending ourselves with old shields. This battle could only end one way. The one chance we had to survive or to avoid capture, was to try something they didn't expect. I had to throw away the rulebook and do something entirely unexpected. It was time to go James Kirk on them. The old one, not the new one. Well, you see, here's my problem with the Star Trek reboot. I enjoy those movies, don't get me wrong, they're a blast, and I know my dad would have liked them too. I don't have any problems with them tinkering with core ideas about the franchise. In fact, I love that the new movies take place in an alternate timeline, so you can keep the old continuity without making the new one a slave to it. Brilliant. My problem is Kirk's new attitude. The old Kirk would break the rules, but only when the rules stood in the way of principles the Federation had sworn to uphold. He believed in the Prime Directive, but he would throw it out the airlock if obeying it meant people would suffer or die. Because, at its core, the Prime Directive was meant to preserve life. Old Kirk is a tough guy, but a completely moral tough guy. New Kirk, on the other hand, seems to get a charge out of breaking the rules and risking lives. Telling him not to do something is a sure way to make sure he'll do it, if only for the pleasure of being a maverick. You can explain it away, I guess. This Kirk is younger than the first Kirk was when we first met him. This Kirk grew up without a father. I suppose it makes sense that he would be more reckless, but half the time he comes across as nothing more than a troublemaker. The sort of clown that original Kirk would have been declared a menace for. I was about to break some rules, but in the old Kirk tradition, I was not getting a thrill out of doing what I'd been told to do. I wanted to get out of the situation alive because I was on a spaceship going to a space station, and I could not accept the injustice of dying now. I refused to let my mother fall victim to her disease because these flying saucer bullies wanted to flex their muscles. I believed the Fatic ship was wrong, and we were right, and following the rules was not going to save us. I looked at the view screen and saw the Fatic ship hovering before us. The thrill of fear coursed through me, and I willed it away. I looked down at the screen and scored another lock, again on the engines, and I didn't hesitate. I would not. The speakers were on, and the Fatic voices were telling us to surrender and prepare for boarding. The alarms and beeps and buzzes of the consoles were thrumming in my ears. The bridge smelled of blood and sweat. I had a chance, and I took it. Urge had explained that the rules required I only fire 1 dark matter missile at a time, and after each firing, assess the extent of the damage. Okay, that was fine if you weren't about to be destroyed. I wasn't interested in finding out how well the evil aliens could dodge my missiles, especially since they would almost certainly know the Confederation rules. They would be counting on that. They weren't counting on me. I fired 5 dark matter missiles, one after the other, and my console assured me each of them was locked, but they were all on different points of the saucer. My hope was that if they tried to dodge one, they would just be setting themselves up for more direct hit from another. As soon as those 5 were away, I locked on another set and released 5 more missiles. I had just unleashed half our arsenal at the enemy, and in case that didn't give them something to think about in the seconds between launch and impact, I peppered them with as many PPB bursts as I could fire. I didn't even care if I had a lock, I just wanted to scare them. I wanted to do something. "History," I said, paraphrasing an alternate timeline Pickard, "will remember the name Dependable." I kept firing and waiting for them to return the favor and blow us to pieces. I fired again, and they did not answer. Instead, I saw pinpricks of light on the saucer's hull as the first of the missiles struck, then another, then more than I could count, because the ship was enveloped in a cloud of fire as the hull of the saucer cracked open and the oxygen was sucked out. I checked my console. 4 of the missiles had gone wide, but the other 6 had smacked against the target like a blast of dark matter shotgun pellets. The saucer shuddered. A small explosion burst from one extreme edge of the hull, as though the ship burped fire. Then the entire hull began to glow, as heat spread out from the initial explosion, red, then white, and then the screen was filled with a light as the enemy vessel burst into a tiny nova. The flash lasted only an instant, and then hot debris quickly cooled and vanished against the black backdrop of the void. I had destroyed a spaceship.